Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. As we welcome you once again on this Wednesday evening, and it is Wednesday nights in conversation with myself, Unite Wadi, as we welcome our listeners, our viewers on the various platforms of Salam Media. And clearly, it's been a very, very eventful day while the world and the world media, social media, right across the entire world has been focusing on the ceasefire deal that has been achieved with regards to Iran. But at Salam Media, we continue covering stories from across the world, and very, very close to our heart, as Palestine has been the issue of Kashmir. And we remind ourselves over and over again that Kashmir is an even older occupation than Palestine. And we also remind ourselves that whatever we see happening in Palestine is being mirrored in Kashmir as well. What the Zionist entity is doing to the Palestinians, the Hindutva BJP government is doing to the people of Kashmir. And I think many of us will recall Salam Media having invited Arua Shah to South Africa. And she wrote a piece in 2020, and I recall even when Arua did her tour in South Africa, she spoke very, very fondly about her father, and she spoke about the fear of her father being imprisoned in India, and also, like thousands of other young people, many of them are actually worried about their elderly parents who are imprisoned in some of the most atrocious and worst conditions that one can ever think of. And this is the reason why we are talking with Ahmed Bin Qasim this evening, and we're talking about his mother's life sentence under India's unjust anti-terror legislation. Now, Ahmed Bin Qasim is the son of one of the leaders, Asia Andrabi, and she has been given a triple life sentence in India. We're going to unpack, and he's written a wonderful piece as well, outlining his concerns with regard to his mother and her imprisonment. We're also going to be joined by no stranger to Salam Media, and he was on tour to South Africa as well. We had the absolute pleasure of meeting him and also doing an interview with Azad Issa, who is an award-winning journalist and an author. So let's get my guests on to screen right now. Ahmed Bin Qasim, as we await him on screen. I see Ahmed joining in. Ahmed, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome and jazakallah khairan so much for your time.
Walaikum assalam. It's a pleasure to be here speaking to the audience of Salam Media.
Yes, and I believe Azad will be joining us very, very shortly. I think he's just having a slight technical issue, but I'm sure it will be resolved. Now, Ahmed, yours is a case where I mentioned Ruha Shah, who was here in South Africa. Salam Media is part of our humanitarian journalism ethos that we hold for a long time. Kashmir has been on our radar, and it will still continue remaining on our radar for reasons that are obvious. These, both Kashmir and Palestine, two of the oldest occupations that we've come to know as well. And what Israel is doing in Palestine is being mirrored in India as well. We hear of political prisoners in Palestine, but we also need to give prominence, and we need to highlight the plight of prisoners in that are languishing under Indian-occupied Kashmir as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think when it comes to Kashmir, especially, you'll notice that even within the oppressed populations, or even within people who have been marginalized, who are on the periphery, Kashmir in some ways is on the margins of the margin itself as well, which is to say that many times the stories that occur in Kashmir are not really heard, and there are no conversations around it. And political imprisonment is one important kind of chapter in that broader story as well. So, right now, you have hundreds of Kashmiris who, rather, thousands of Kashmiris who are in different prisons, both in Kashmir itself, imprisoned by India, and then also in different states of India. They have been incarcerated hundreds and thousands of miles away from their homes and families. And we see this in the case of Palestine, how Israel has repeatedly used incarceration as a very important tool in its broad framework of how it subjugates Palestinian people. Incarceration is one very important instrument in that, and India has also used it extensively throughout its history of occupation in Kashmir. And so you have journalists in prison right now, Kashmiri journalists. You have human rights defenders in prison right now. You have all of Kashmiri resistance leadership in prison right now. Most of them have been incarcerated in New Delhi's Tihar jail for almost a decade now. But you also have Kashmiris who have been in prison since the 90s, which is to say that they have been in prison for almost 3 decades now. You have multiple Kashmiris who have been in prison for over 2 decades. And so these stories and these people, they have been completely invisibilized from our conversations, and that is partly what imprisonment or incarceration is designed to do, which is that it is designed to erase these people from conversations, to render them invisible. So I think part of what then becomes our duty is to keep on talking about these people, because otherwise prison is just going to erase them from our conversations. And we have had stories now of, for example, Altaf Shah, who you mentioned a while back, who died in prison, who was effectively murdered in prison by the Indian state. And I say murdered because the Indian state constructs conditions in these prisons where the health of these Kashmiri prisoners is pushed to the point, and maybe I'll speak about it further more later on, is pushed to the point where, you know, when they die, it's not a natural death. They die as a result of prolonged denial of medical care. So that's the situation that we're dealing with right now.
Well, certainly, and I think for you personally, it is personal because it's a very, very difficult situation for you to deal with. And when I was reading this piece that was written in TRT, where you speak about one's spouse that is referred to as Sharike Hayat, one with whom life is shared, and for you, it is very, very personal because it is not only your mother, but it's your father as well. And you says, your parents have become Sharika Hayat to each other because they both sharing a life sentence in these prisons.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when it comes to like father's imprisonment, that is something that I've grown up with. He was first arrested in 1993 under the Public Safety Act, which is one of the many laws that the Indian state uses to incarcerate Kashmiri people who are involved in resistance, and it's arbitrary detention basically. And when he was arrested, he was put in prison. My mother was arrested along with him, and my elder brother as well, who was an infant at that time. And he's the youngest Kashmiri prisoner, by the way. He holds that kind of record, if you want to call it that. And so all three of them were arrested. And then, while father was in custody, he was subjected to torture. And during that, a confession was extracted out of him. And on the basis of that confession, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. And he was briefly released in 1999 and also acquitted, but that acquittal was later overturned. And since 1999, he has been in prison continuously. I was a few months old when he was arrested. And mother has also spent over 15 years of her life now in different prisons intermittently. Now, with this life sentence, as you said, when the sentence happened and I spoke to my mother, these were her words. She told me that she has effectively become my father, Shariki Hayat, only now, because although they were not able to share a life together, which is what you're supposed to do, as a couple, but they do share a life sentence, and that is what kind of makes them Sharik Hayat for each other. They're companions in this life sentence. They're in two different prisons right now. My mother, she's in New Delhi's Tihar jail, which is one of the most infamous prisons in India, one of the largest prison complexes in South Asia, very overcrowded prison known for its very uninhabitable conditions. There have been multiple instances where people have died in this prison because of the conditions in prison, Kashmiris and non Kashmiris. And father is in a different prison. It's called Haryana, the place. and the two of them last saw each other in 2016. They have been married for over 3 decades now. In these 3 decades, they have spent 2 to 3 years together. The rest of it, they've only seen each other in prison. When my mother would go visit my father, the last of which happened in 2016. And ever since that day, they haven't seen each other, and we haven't seen them as well since 2017. Like, I haven't seen my parents since that time. So, but I want to kind of say one thing before I we can move on to the next question, which is that these stories, or the story of my parents, is not exceptional or unique in the broader kind of context of Kashmir. So we have people like Ghulam Qadir Butt, who is another Kashmiri prisoner who has been in prison for over 25, 26 years now. You have his family has a very similar story. His wife passed away while he was in prison. His mother passed away while he was in prison, and he was not allowed to attend their funeral as well. And he's left behind children as well. And you have Dr. Shariati, another Kashmiri prisoner. He has been in prison for over 15 years now because of his participation in Kashmiri self-determination movement. So although my parents' stories is in a way unique in that both of them are in prison and both of them are serving life sentence, but otherwise these stories are not exceptional. They are kind of embodiments of the broader condition that Kashmiris are facing as a collective.
Well, certainly, Ahmed. But also, I think what makes it also unique is you mentioned the case of your brother, the youngest prisoner, and
Yeah.
now in the case of your mother as well, where we're talking about this is the first time where a Kashmiri woman is sentenced for life.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely the first time that has happened. So previously, mother was detained many a times. I mean, she was first detained in the 90s, and then in 2000, early 2000s, then in 2009, 2016. So she has had many periods of detention. But all of those detentions used to be under Public Safety Act. So she was jailed for a year or two and mostly incarcerated in Kashmir, and so kind of close to home. And we were able, this was like preventive administrative detention. um, but now what is different is that she has been incarcerated in New Delhi, and they are now wanting to ensure that she never sees daylight again, and she never steps foot outside of prison again, and that she never sees her family again, and that she never has any interaction outside of prison now. That is what their plan is. This is something that they did with my father when they sentenced him to life, and then interpreted that life sentence to mean imprisonment till death, which otherwise it was not supposed to mean that. It was supposed to mean 14 to 20 years of incarceration. That is how life imprisonment was interpreted otherwise in Jammu and Kashmir. But in his case, they kind of did this juridical rereading where they said no, life imprisonment means life till death. And now they're trying to do the same thing in the case of my mother as well, which is they have handed her 3 terms of life imprisonment. And this is the first time a Kashmiri woman has been convicted and then sentenced to life imprisonment. So, yeah, this is India basically testing waters. They're going to see if there's some reaction to this. They're going to see if there's some pushback against this. This is how they create new norms. They normalize these things. It was very unheard of for Kashmiri women to be detained in New Delhi prior to 2018. They did that. They saw that there was no reaction or pushback against it. So now they keep on kind of broadening the line, these transgressions. And then this is going to become a norm. Right now, you have over 10 Kashmiri women who are incarcerated in New Delhi. So, yeah, that's how they operate.
Well, the thing is, we obviously will speak about the merits of the case and some of the other details surrounding the case as well. But let's just welcome Azad Issa for this evening. Azad, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Walaikum salam. Thanks a lot for waiting for me. I'm so sorry for the delay. My computer has a life of its own. So
That's fine,
decided to
no
do the same
problem.
thing.
Jazakallah so much. It's good to see you again, Azad, after we are having met in South Africa. And I know for a long time you've been raising the plight of Kashmir as well. And I want to say Jazakallah to you for bringing this to our attention as well. And also at the same time, highlighting the draconian legislation that is being enacted by India and just talking earlier to Ahmed, he just painted an overall picture on his family, his parents, his brother as well. Azad, I know you spend a lot of time highlighting this, and perhaps just quick by way of an introduction, just your thoughts on this draconian of legislation that India has been using, and now it's being taken to another level.
Yeah, this legislation, as I got the last bit of what Ahmed said. It's not just his parents or his mom in particular recently that have been affected by this, as you said, draconian Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, the UAPA. There have been thousands of people in India itself that have been sort of like charged with this, or picked up with this UAPA charges, and they're held for years on end before anything actually becomes concrete. There's a very low conviction rate, meaning that it's very difficult to actually provide any evidence for this, because basically the process is the punishment essentially. The laws are very vague, they're very broad, and it's affected activists, it has affected journalists, it's affected all kinds of dissenters. And in Kashmir, of course, it's used a lot more, and it's a lot more punishing, and it's a lot more used more sharply. And this case in particular is quite extraordinary because of how the state essentially shifted the goalposts in going after her, right? So I don't know to what extent Ahmed explained some of this, but I went through all of the documents, or well, most of it, especially with regards to the conviction and the sentencing documents, and also looked at how the prosecutors tried to basically shove aside the acquittals and basically focused on a whole bunch of other things to try and get her the maximum punishment. So to reiterate, Ahmed's mom, Asia Andrabi, there was no evidence found that she had conducted violent act. She was acquitted of the most serious charges from the get-go. What essentially she was convicted of was her association, speech, her political beliefs, and there was nothing to do with her actions. So imagine that you talk about, let's say, some kind of economic system that you feel is oppressive, and you talk about the economic system, and you talk about how this economic system needs to be dethroned or sort of demolished. And you say that there should be radical means of taking down that system. And then you are basically charged for basically essentially taking up arms, to break up the system. And in the end, they don't find that you have done any of the sort. And then basically it's just your thoughts or your statements about taking down the system that then, uh, uh, enables the state to then find you guilty of actually trying to wage war against the state. So it's quite absurd because there's no plans, there's no action, there's no incitement that's proven in any way. And so what's this case actually shows is that this is a life sentence, based primarily on political expression, essentially. And I think what's really dangerous about this is that, as I said earlier, is that it shifts the goalpost to such an extent in which dissent itself becomes an act of criminality. And so Kashmir, as Ahmed has said himself, that Kashmir has been used and seen as a kind of laboratory where you test out these sort of mechanisms and these logics. And inevitably, as you've seen with so many things in India itself, this will move to India. So if you separate the story of Kashmir and Asia Andrabi and the kind of the activists and the dissenters or the journalists in Kashmir itself that deserve to have the right to self-determination as well as the right to self-expression, you put it one side, and as an Indian, Indian Muslim or Indian anything, if you don't care about that, it's only a matter of time where this sort of thing will be enacted upon you. So there's various levels for why this is important for Indians, but also, like, for just for um, just even besides that, it's a case of just a case um, you know of human decency, that this is like completely absurd.
Well, it certainly is, Azad, and I think bringing Ahmed back into the discussion, Ahmed, Azad speaks about expression, and I think you've alluded to this as well in one of the pieces that you've written, where you speak about India treating activism as a crime. And I think this is important for us to understand. And also, it's not only just about activism as a crime, but activism where a case has taken 8 years before the sentencing has actually been passed.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, because the idea here is that for the Indian state, if they could kind of devise a machine, and I'm not saying this as an exaggeration, if they could kind of come up with an instrument or a machine through which they could kind of X-ray the thoughts that Kashmiri people have, that they might not even express. So if they were to able to kind of come up with this Orwellian innovation where they're able to see everything that Kashmiris think, they would definitely incarcerate Kashmiris for even fleeting thoughts that they might have if Indian state finds those thoughts to kind of call for self-determination, or sometimes not even that. Sometimes it's even less than self-determination. For example, if someone is critical of the excesses of Indian state in Kashmir, even that is seen as something intolerable, let alone calling for Kashmir's freedom or liberation from India, which is what my mother and many other Kashmiris believe in, what majority of Kashmiris kind of desire. So I think activism is definitely treated as a crime. And with these people, as Azad kind of spoke about this, kind of alluded to this, is that there's a twofold kind of operation at play here. One is that the Indian state wants to punish my parents and hundreds of other Kashmiri prisoners. Two women who are with my mother, who also have been sentenced to 30 years of imprisonment, one of whom is Sophie Fahmida, who is in her 30s. And when she went to prison in 2018, she was a perfectly healthy woman who was in her 30s, and right now she's bedridden and she's on a wheelchair because of what prison has done to her, the kind of conditions that you have in prison. And so the idea of the Indian state is, first of all, to punish these people, to inflict pain on these people, and then to also simultaneously, the violence is also communicative, which is to say that they're also trying to talk to the broader Kashmiri population through the stories of these three women. And they're telling the Kashmiri population that, look, you have three women here, and two of them are in their 60s, and one of them is in her 30s and is bedridden right now. And they have not picked up a weapon against the Indian state, although one is within one's rights to do that against an occupation by all kind of standards of morality. But they did not do that. But even then, we are handing them effective life sentences. So what stops us from doing the same to you? So the operation here is twofold. It is to punish these women, but then to also talk to the broader Kashmiri population through the case of these three women. And this is not me being hypothetical. If you read the sentencing, the judge says that. He says that the value of the case is in how it establishes social deterrence, which is to say that we have to punish these women harshly, because if we show leniency, what would that say to the broader Kashmiri population that might also harbor similar desires for freedom, for dignity? So this is not me being hypothetical. This is in the sentencing. If you read that, Azad has put it on his public kind of Substack, I think called Hostile Homelands. So if you go there, you read the sentencing, it says it. The judge explicitly says this, that we are going to turn this case into a means of social deterrence for the broader Kashmiri population. So I think that's something very important that we have to keep in mind.
Well, certainly do.
Can I
Ahmed
can
and
I, can I
Azad,
jump in?
yes, okay.
Can I,
We're going to go for a
yeah.
quick ad break.
Okay, sure.
Okay, you can jump in quickly, and then we'll go for the ad break.
No, I wanted to add 2 points to this. in that, are we on the commercial break right now, or should I go on?
Go on, please, Azad. Go on, please.
Um, two points to jump on Ahmed's intervention is that the first thing was that education in this instance was used against Asia and Rabi. So meaning that, usually when we think about a court case in which someone is accused of terrorism, there's this idea that, this person's educated, so essentially, so this person's uneducated. So if they were educated, then this will work, better for them, right? But in this case, it's sort of like she is seen as fully responsible for her thoughts. So you basically essentially saying that this person, should be punished because she's so well educated, she should know better, sort of thing. She should know better, and so she was sort of like this brilliant mind that had this whole plan to take down the state. So instead of like education being seen as as a positive thing, here's a woman that's been punished for being educated, which is quite extraordinary. And the other thing is that there was a Hollywood film called Minority Report that came out some years ago, and that report, that film spoke about how you are punished just for the possibility, of carrying out a crime. So to go to Ahmed's point about, if they had an X-ray machine to know what's in your brain, they would punish you for it. Just the thought of essentially acting against the state or being against the state essentially means that you are a criminal.
Jazakallah for that, Azad. We'll take a quick break. We'll be back. Well, welcome back to our discussion this evening in conversation with myself, Inayat Wadi, on this Wednesday evening. And with me is award-winning journalist Azad Issa, and also the son of Asia Andrabi, who has been Ahmed Bin Qasim, who has been given 3 life sentences in India. Ahmed, just to continue, and I think this is important to understand, is to look at the merits of the case. The key issue here is the court acquitted your mom of waging war, funding militancy, every charge that carried the implication that there was violence. So there was absolutely no evidence whatsoever as far as violence is concerned. But I think what is also important is one of the comments that was made in your article is your mom made it clear that she showed no remorse because she's standing up for what is right. She is standing up for a cause. And I think that is absolutely important. That is critical for one to actually understand. And also at the same time, when one looks at, her struggle, and her struggle is not only about herself, but her struggle has been for other Kashmiri women as well. And we know how sexual exploitation has been used as a weapon of war for a very, very long time. In India, we know about the brutal, rape and all of those things that have taken place as far as Kashmiri women are concerned. And also what we've come to learn in recently, even with the genocide in Gaza, in terms of dehumanization and how prisoners are being dehumanized. And I'm sure exactly the same scenario applies as far as Kashmir is concerned, the prisoners in Kashmir. And this is something that you fear as well for your own parents in terms of how they're being dehumanized.
I mean, yeah, definitely. So there's like two things to your question. The first is, yeah, you're right. There was no charge of which they were convicted that had within it the implication of violence. So I would say quick two things here. One is that we have to kind of recognize that the kind of juridical or the legal system of India is rigged against Kashmiri prisoners, which is to say that it's kind of designed in a way that it criminalizes Kashmiri resistance and Kashmiri calls for liberation. So justice, so to speak, cannot emerge from for Kashmiri prisoners, especially those involved in the movement, from within the Indian judiciary. It's very kind of difficult to imagine that. We have seen that in our personal lives, in the cases of our loved ones who have been in prison. We have seen this throughout Kashmir's history. But the other thing also is that in this case, what you also see is that even if you go by their own logics, if you kind of concede for a second that their judicial system has some legitimacy or some kind of pattern according to which it operates, that is also suspended in this case, which is to say that they acquitted them of all the charges that had within it the implication of violence, and then still decided that based on speech, based on thoughts, based on association, based on mobilization, they have to be sentenced to life imprisonment. So that just shows you the kind of absurdity of how law serves occupation in contexts like Kashmir. What you said about um, the dehumanization aspect, as opposed to kind of approaching it in an abstract way, I just want to tell you a story of Sophie Fahmida, who is one of the three Kashmiri women who have been sentenced. She, as I mentioned before, she requires urgent back surgery, spinal surgery because of her condition, and she was taken to one of on one of the occasions in recent times. She was taken to a hospital, for a hospital visit, which also came after months and months of petitioning. She was taken to a hospital for some checkup, and the doctor on duty, now we're talking about a doctor, we're not talking about a policeman, we're not talking about someone from the state, quote unquote, we're not talking about a prison official. The doctor on duty, who was an Indian, refused to treat her when she was taken to the hospital. And the reason was that he said he's not going to treat, and in Hindi they have this word called algavadi, which means terrorist, so to speak. And he said, I'm not going to treat a terrorist. And so the dehumanization is not limited to state apparatus. It's not just the Indian state, that is punishing these Kashmiri prisoners. The hatred is kind of seeped into the social fabric of the Indian nation state, where you also have doctors who are participating in that. I'm using the example of a doctor because generally we imagine the doctors to kind of, be outside of these, distinctions, political kind of, we don't see them as political actors, so to speak. But here you have a Kashmiri prisoner who is being dehumanized even by a doctor, and then a very junior doctor uh, saw her and even that was just cursory. So this is the level of dehumanization. This is the level of otherization that Kashmiri prisoners have faced. Muslims generally have faced that, but if you're a Kashmiri and then a Kashmiri who seeks liberation and then who is visibly Muslim, so you keep on adding layers of otherization. Okay, you're a Kashmiri, you tick a box. You're a Muslim, you tick a box. You're a Kashmiri who wants liberation, you tick another box. Then you're someone who is visibly Muslim because these women they veil. So I mean that's all the ingredients right there. You're the perfect victim of dehumanization.
Yes, Ahmed, can you give us a bit of an insight into the activism of your mom? And I'm sure you've got quite a bit to share over the years, and in terms of what went through her mind, what she intended doing, what did she actually want to achieve ultimately?
Yeah, I mean, when she started, her idea, to be honest, was just to do social and religious work, which is to do welfare work, to teach Kashmiri women uh, Islam, to teach them Quran, to teach them their rights, their responsibilities. But what she realized very quickly, and then to prevent them from all forms of oppression, this included domestic abuse, their husbands abusing them. This included all forms of marginalization, based on caste, based on other forms of social hierarchies. But what she realized very quickly was that in a place like Kashmir, in an occupied territory, you can't do this work without the state impeding this work, without the occupation not allowing you to do this kind of liberative work. And so she realized this very quickly, that if you want to work for Kashmiri women in Kashmir, you can't do that without simultaneously struggling against the occupation. And there is no possibility of liberation for Kashmiri women. They're, kind of them having a dignified life within a structure of occupation. And so this kind of pushed her into confrontation with the Indian state, where she realized that she has to simultaneously do these two things, which is then what she did throughout her life, her and her organization. That they had two layers of work. One was their kind of political activism for self determination, but simultaneously they had centers throughout Kashmir, centers of learning where Kashmiri women were educated, where they were, they had schools, small girls, mostly from the kind of financially challenged, with financially challenged backgrounds. They would study there, they were taken care of. Then you had widows of men who were murdered by Indian state or imprisoned. They were taken care of in these centers. They were kind of made financially independent, autonomous. So the work was twofold. One was social work to kind of deal with the ills that seep into society as a result of the society being occupied. Then the other work was more kind of overtly political, which was for advocacy for Kashmiri self determination. And one important aspect of their work was the work against India's sexual exploitation of Kashmiri women, which is very systematic, in which you have bureaucracy that's involved, you have military officials that are involved, you have high ranking police officials that are involved. One very known example was the 2006 sex scandal in Kashmir, which Mother and her organization organized against. And then the Indian state detained them for organizing against the sexual exploitation of Kashmiri women, as opposed to going against the people who were doing that. And that's not surprising because they were the ones who were doing it. So Sophie Fahmida was arrested for the first time in that period in 2006 when she was in high school for organizing against this sex scandal under the Public Safety Act, and she was in detention for almost a year. That was the first time she was arrested. So yeah, this is the kind of crux of the kind of work that they were trying to do. I put it in very kind of simplistic, in very kind of brief terms.
Yes, Azad, when you called me over the weekend and we discussed this issue briefly telephonically, and one of the reasons why we are having this discussion tonight is to highlight the plight of Ahmed's mum and also all the other prisoners as well, which is not getting or receiving the necessary attention right across the world. And whether we're talking about mainstream media and also other forms of media where, this is not being spoken about. And I think this is important, this is critical, because we've seen In the case of Palestinian prisoners, we've seen many campaigns for the release of many prominent figures that have been imprisoned by Israel and those things. And I think the world seems to be turning a blind eye and being deaf also to the cries of the Kashmiri prisoners. And I think this is one of the reasons why we're having this discussion. What more can be done, Azad? I think you muted yourself with that. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, am I? Yeah, okay. I think it's on one hand a sort of slightly complicated question, but it need not be, because I think the first stage, the first step with all of this is to keep on talking about these matters, as to borrow from what Ahmed basically has been trying to do. Because if you look at like Ahmed's mom's case and his dad's case, right? We're talking about a situation in which so few people are willing to talk about this matter, right? So few people are able to talk about it, and um, the people who are willing usually to talk about these kinds of issues in terms of political prisoners, they have been staying away from this matter. And um, and I mean, what I mean by this is that, in many ways, this case, Asia and Rabi's case, sort of embodies the failures of like liberal feminism, right? Because she doesn't speak to the way they see how the world should be or how women should be. They want a very particular type of educated Muslim woman who's compliant in other ways when it comes to either dress or in terms of social values. And so she's been rejected on that side. And then, so on one hand, she's rejected from that end, and then she's stuck on the other side, the rock and the hard place, meaning that the Hindu nationalist agenda on the other end, which in this case, when it comes to Kashmir, has always been pretty much the same thing. And it kind of shows how this occupation wants to keep Kashmiris compliant and silenced, right? Or silenced. And so I think the really important thing here is to continue talking about these cases, um, to the extent that people start imagining India a little bit differently. And I think that has already happened in many parts of the globe, in which we've seen how India has behaved over the past several years, how it's taken part in this genocide with Israel on Gaza, how it's taken the side of the Israelis and the US with regards to this war in Iran, and how sort of sidelined they have become when it comes to ideas of the global south, or ideas of decolonial thought, or any of those things that anything to do with standing up for the oppressed. And I think this is important to continue pushing that conversation, because there are so many political prisoners in India, and this is only going to increase. Just as you see this case being sidelined, you see other kinds of issues within India itself being sidelined. For instance, Ahmed's Twitter account was just blocked, I think, in India, maybe today or yesterday, because he was talking about it. So again, he's not the only one, right? But in this case, he's just this lone figure, lone person talking about his mom being incarcerated, and now it's blocked. And so that even that is not possible in India. My Twitter account has also been blocked. And people who have spoken up with regards to Modi or India's connection with Israel and this war in Iran have also been blocked within India itself. So I think it's incumbent on your audience is mostly South Africans, South African Muslims in particular. I think South African Muslims have to really think about these political prisoners not as uh, you know as located in one place, but part of a broader kind of struggle against very similar types of fascism and authoritarianism, and very particular types of oppression. And India is very much part of that. And again, when you think about this case, how absurd it is that here's a person who's been held for 8 years before she's sort of convicted and sentenced for further, like, life sentence, right? Which is pretty much a death sentence. Unfortunately, that's the reality. It's actually ludicrous, in the way they have pushed this case forward to the maximum punishment. But beyond that, she has spent, collectively already 15 years in jail. And for what? And to go back to my original point about the sort of liberal feminism and sort of like the mask that has been lifted, right? When you think about how the wars in Afghanistan were waged in the 2000, right? The U.S. invasion of Afghanistan, about trying to save women. This speaks to a similar kind of logic. When you think about how someone like Asia has been treated and also demonized because of the values also that she brings, that this Islamic values linked to speaking up against oppression, in Kashmir, how that how much that stands in contrast to sort of this Epstein class that we have today, where everything's completely commodified. The women's bodies are completely commodified, and how that is connected completely to imperialism and oppression of people, and how they turn that around to make you then the so-called terrorist.
Well, certainly, Azad. And also, I think, Ahmed, uh, when we're talking about media, and obviously, we know the position as far as Indian media is concerned. And I'm sure, I'm not too sure, how Pakistan has actually responded to this, because right next door, and obviously Pakistan has got an interest in what is taking place in Kashmir as well. What are your thoughts as far as the media is concerned, and how the media has actually taken up this case of your mom?
I mean, they have not. That's the thought that I have, which is that it's just very selective. I mean, close to nothing if you search on the internet right now. So you'll find barely anything other than the article that Azad wrote, and something that I wrote. I can't find anything else that, to be honest, uh, narrates the story. I'm not necessarily saying narrates the story how we want it to be narrated, but even from a balanced perspective, balanced how they understand like this whole myth of kind of neutral journalism, even by their own kind of standards, there is no reporting on it. It's not even been reported, let alone I'm not, so therefore I can't talk about the language of reporting, because um, there's no reporting in the first place. It's as if it never happened. So complicity can be in two ways, right? We've seen this in the case of Gaza, for example, that there's a lot of reporting, but then we speak about how things are being reported, the language of it, the terms that are being used, the vocabulary that's being used. But in this case, and to be honest, in most of the cases of Kashmiris, there's no reporting in the first place. So you don't even reach that point where you can then talk about, this is the right way to talk about it. I can't do that. So the media, therefore, the task then, for example, for a platform like Salam Media, is to basically at least initiate the conversation, or to at least let people know that this has happened, and then to not allow them to forget. I think that's the kind of task here, is to first of all bring it to people's notice, because you can't blame them for not knowing. So for example, if someone is sitting in Durban, or some other part of South Africa, in Cape Town, so I don't expect them to know the story. I mean, how would they know? But that is the task here, is that you tell them the story, and then you make sure that they don't forget, because so much is happening that sometimes it's hard to remember, because you have Gaza, and after Gaza, what's left? What is left? I mean, then we had the recent episode in Iran, and right now we are seeing the scenes in Lebanon. So there's so much oppression that there's a saturation, so to speak. So people don't know what to remember, what to cry about, what to pray about, what to kind of mourn. And so the task then is to make sure that these stories, which sometimes then get buried, and they're not known, is to make sure that Kashmir also features in that conversation. It also features in people's, when they talk about these things over dinner, or when they're talking about these things in the safety of distance, they also talk about this. And so we don't expect a lot from mainstream kind of media. We have seen their linkages with the oppressors. They've become very glaringly open now. And so therefore, this is why Salam media and institutions or places like these then become more important for us, because we want our story to be told at least to people who we know care. So when you talk about the South African population, and when you talk about also specifically the Muslims of South Africa, we know that they care about these causes. So we at least want them to know. We want them to know that this is happening. We want them to know that these women, Kashmiri Muslim women, are being effectively, they have been handed out death sentences. And this is not hyperbolic. The only time that perhaps we will see them now would be, without any exaggeration, at their funerals. That's the only time they might walk outside that prison. So that is not what we should be reduced to. Our families have been broken, our homes have been confiscated. So previously they would take our people and then jail them, and then we were at least left with their memories in our homes, their rooms, their wardrobes, things they would use. And now the Indian state confiscates that as well. So you're like, okay, you take our people, then you take our house. So they just want to basically uproot everything that you have. And then the only thing that you're left with, so for example, I used to talk to my father through letters, and then so that was the only thing that I had with me from him. And then they stopped that as well. They were like, you can't communicate through letters as well. So now the only thing we have is, our thoughts and our memories and our dreams and our prayers. That's the only thing we are left with. So it's to rob you of everything normal. That's what the occupation does with me, with thousands and thousands of Kashmiri kids, some of whom, most of whom, many of whom have had it worse than me. I have this privilege to kind of talk to you right now, but you have worse stories as well.
Well, certainly. Also, Azad, I think, just from a media perspective, I think one of the objectives in having this discussion is obviously to write a piece, number one, but also to reach out to other forms of media here in South Africa, both mainstream and non-stream, and also non-mainstream, and also to reach out to individuals, organizations. We have got politicians, within the South African government that hold Kashmir quite dear to their hearts as well. So it is a story that we would obviously be telling them as well, so that they can raise these issues on multiple platforms. Be it at a on a political platform, media, and other forms as well, activists as well. So hopefully, inshallah, from here, it's going to be about podcasts. It will be sharing the material. It's going to be on YouTube in any case, but also in terms of writing a piece as well. So hopefully, inshallah, at Salam Media, it's something that we will be able to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if if you are able to connect these dots, um, in many ways they aren't any dots anymore; they're big blots, right? It's very clear what these connections are, how they're working with each other, and how how we can educate each other in a way that is not, as Ahmed says, it's not a judgmental not a judgmental thing that you don't know about something, but it's about like empowering each other, to know that if we're going to think about one item or one thing, these are the other sort of things that are connected to it. To be to that particular point, right? Things are going haphazard in Lebanon right now. Yesterday we had these incredible tweets about ending civilization in Iran. And the strange thing is that the story that I was working on was about a bunch of steel that was sent from India to Israel, and it feels like not so important, right? But that steel is basically military grade steel that's going to be made into some kind of, in some kind of weaponry, or in some kind of, or fitted to some kind of tanks, or fitted to some kind of missiles that will then, end up in Lebanon, or end up in Gaza, or end up somewhere else, And so these are the kind of connections that are taking place, and it just feels a tad silly if we're going to just think about places in silos. So also understand that in the South African context is a little bit difficult because people still misunderstand. They still see India in a different light because of the historical connections that existed with the ANC prior to apartheid ending. There's also BRICS. There's all kinds of these dimensions that exist, but those are not intractable sort of like dilemmas. There was a time in which people saw Israel in that way, in South Africa itself, and in other places, and so it just requires keep on knocking, on that door, to understand that there's immense oppression taking place within Kashmir and within India itself, and it's not about caring about a place necessarily only that's across the ocean. It's also about what that means for your own humanity, as well as what it means for your own resources within the African continent itself. Because this authoritarianism and this fascism also is predicated on theft and theft of resources, and silencing. Um, and the last point about these connections, you think about how people are talking about Sudan and the UAE being connected to Sudan, but our own cricket stadiums in South Africa, many of them are sponsored by DP Ports, for instance, and DP, Dubai Ports, that are essentially, involved in Sudan, in the theft of Sudan. So what I mean by this is that we are stepping on other people's lives, basically, even in the space of a cricket match. And so when it comes to India or to Dubai or Abu Dhabi and all these places, it's sort of incumbent that we welcome this empowerment of education. That otherwise there will be a time in which we won't be able to look ourselves in the face, essentially.
Well, we certainly will, and I'm going to ask Ahmed just to give us his final thoughts, because again, just referring to this article in the Middle East Eye, it talks about your mom sentencing not as an exception, but rather a precedent. And I think this is dangerous because if something is not being done now, and something and the right messages are not going out, this could send a precedent for even worse to come going into the future, Ahmed.
I mean, definitely. I mean, it's not, again, I keep on saying this, it's not hypothetical. 2, 3 days back, a Kashmiri couple, a husband and a wife, were arrested by the Indian state in Kashmir, in south of Kashmir. And they were arrested and they were accused of being associated with Mother and her organization, and the two women who are in Tihar right now with Mother. So we are speaking of precedent, and the precedent has already been set, and on the basis of that, other people have already been arrested. So it's not even something that's projected onto the future. This husband and wife were arrested a few days back already based on their association with Mother and her associates. And now, because they have been convicted and sentenced, what would it mean now for this couple? Because they have been accused of association with them. So this is not hypothetical. This is not abstract. We have seen this now. I'm sure that that couple now is going to be, again, through this sentencing, through this judgment, a similar kind of fate awaits them as well, along the line as well. So I would just like to end by a very small note, which is that Azad spoke about the connections, and he is very right in that Israel, with all of its defense ties with India, there are technologies that are used by India in these prisons, surveillance technologies, barbed wires, wires that are kind of alarm wires that are made with in collaboration with Israel, right? So when I think of my mother or my father who are in these prisons, yes, they are imprisoned by India, but that imprisonment is also simultaneously both enabled by and reinforced by Israel. So we can't kind of fragment these causes, we can't atomize them, we can't look at them in isolation because they're all kind of tied to each other. So yeah, but some causes, some stories are told more than the others, and that is where I think Salam Media and other places become very important. So that stories that are not known, names that are not known. If you have a person who has been in prison for the last 33 years, which is the case of my father, you would imagine that many people might have heard his name. 33 years. He was 25 when he was jailed. He's 58 now. It's a lifetime. But most of the people don't know even his name. So that's where I think maybe that's a small, very small thing that one can ask is to just know the names, know the story. I mean, nobody is expecting, for someone in South Africa to be able to free these people, but do what just is their duty, basically.
Well, Jazakallah khairan so much for that, Ahmed, and also to Azad as well for setting up tonight's discussion right here on Salam Media. We do appreciate both of you taking time out. I know it's difficult, Ahmed, but our du'as are with you, our du'as are with your parents, our du'as are with the people of Kashmir and also all the prisoners as well, inshallah. Allah make it easy, inshallah. And may we see, like I always say, in the case of Palestine, may we see the liberation of Kashmir in our lifetime. May we see the liberation of Palestine also in our lifetime, inshallah. So, Jazakallah to both of you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Well, that brings us to the end of part one of this evening's broadcast. And we still have got part two, and this is a major talking point as well. The ceasefire in Iran, but Al-Aqsa still remains closed, and we'll be talking with Samuel Munayar, Ismail Adam Patel, and Maulana Ibrahim Musa immediately after this.